Let me just ask the obvious question, which is, of course, from an economic lens, if you think about total GDP, right, the more people you have in the country, the bigger the GDP because there's more activity, right? So to what extent do you think this high migration has been a deliberate policy that is being set by government and presumably from Treasury to try and support the GDP?
Oh, 100%. Look, there's basically the federal government, well, the Australian Treasury, which is the puppet master behind Big Australia. I sort of consider the Australian Treasury like a vested interest business lobby. Right? They've got their two key performance indicators are obviously to keep the economy ticking over, so just aggregate GDP. That's number one. And number two, which is related to number one, is they want the federal budget to remain strong. So the easiest way to do that is just to pump in the number of people because obviously more people means more economic activity, which means the economic pie grows, even if the share of the pie doesn't grow. But, you know, unfortunately, the way economics is reported on in Australia and elsewhere is basically a fraud. And, you know, every time the national accounts comes out, the headline figure is Australia's economy grows 0.2% in Q1, when really the headline should have been, you know, Australia's economy shrinks 0.3% in per capita terms, which should have been, you know, what everyone cares about. And look, to be fair, GDP per capita is not a great measure either, but it's a better one than aggregate GDP. But for some reason, because everyone reports on the aggregate, it allows the governments to run these BS, you know, quantitative peopling type policies to try and boost the economic pie, not worrying about the share of everyone's pie. Now, the other reason why Treasury loves Big Australia is because the federal government collects 82% of the nation's taxes. So if you import a whole bunch of people, most of those people will work, so they'll pay income tax, and will also increase company tax, other things equal, and those things flow straight to the federal government. Unfortunately, the cost of that migration tends to fall on the state governments, the local governments, and you and me, because the state governments then become cash-strapped. Then they have to sell everything, which is what we're seeing, like massive privatizations, land registries, ports, everything. And then all that ends up doing is it ends up with, you know, you have private monopolies gouging us, and we end up paying higher user charges, so effectively private taxes. So the federal government collects all the benefits. The Australian Treasury loves it because it boosts their two key performance indicators. But unfortunately, their key performance indicators don't include overall welfare and the health of household budgets, state budgets, the natural environment, and all these other things that are basically destroyed when you grow population so aggressively like we have. And that's sort of a long way of answering your question, I guess.
Right. And to add to that, of course, more people need more services. So whether it's healthcare, whether it's driving around, so transport systems, you know, pretty much wherever you look. And one of the reasons why we've got pressure on the healthcare system, again, is because of this massive extra demand that was not really planned for. And, you know, there's been very little planning and there's been very little thinking about how to accommodate this massive number of people coming in, more demand for water, more demand for power, all of those things. So essentially the consequences of the big population move, you know, we're seeing it everywhere now. Another point is worth making that there were quite a few people, I've even heard Albo argue this, well, what we're doing is just replacing the dip that we had through the COVID period, right? Which is the biggest load of BS that I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's not replacing the dip in housing construction, the dip in everything else we had, is he? So he's only focusing on one side of the equation there, which is hence why we have all these shortages everywhere. What an idiot. You know, the fact of the matter is, you know, if you take the housing sector, right, the housing residential construction costs are 30 to 40% higher than they were, depending on the measure, before the pandemic. Well, that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the pandemic. So this whole notion, we're just you know, catching up. This is catch-up migration. You know, catch-up migration is just a farce when the supply side hasn't caught up and won't catch up because we've got structurally higher costs. It's just moronic. You know, one of the coalition MPs, I can't remember which one. It was a pretty good analogy he used, I must admit. He said, "Hang on, so if we stop on, you know, if we're driving from Melbourne to Sydney on the Hume Highway and we have to stop for 15 minutes at roadworks, well, you don't drive at 200 kilometres an hour to catch up your lost time. Like, that's just reckless." Well, that's kind of what we've done with migration. It's just stupid. So this whole notion that, that like I hear these big Australia charlatans, like from, the ANU. There's this new guy, new propagandist there. He just keeps trying to run the line that, and Abel Rizvi uses it. He goes, oh, Australia's population is still smaller than it was projected in the 2019 budget, blah, 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 blah. It's basically caught up now anyway. But it's just such a stupid way of looking at it. I mean, nothing else has caught up, which is why we have the problems we have, where demand has run so far ahead of supply. And the other thing is the population forecast in the 2019 budget were ridiculously high anyway. I mean, Australia's been running this big migration Ponzi since the mid 2000s. So it was irresponsible in 2019, and it's even more irresponsible now to do it and to try and do this catch up. So yeah, the whole thing that we've just got this, so it's already catch up, is absolutely moronic. This was deliberate. This was deliberate by the Albanese government. They literally staged a fake jobs and skills summit to get a fake consensus to run big migration. And the reason why I say it's fake is because they stacked the summit full of big pro-immigration shills, right? Everyone in there wanted big migration. And they were business lobbyists, property people, universities, the Grattan Institute, who are massive shills. Every shill under the sun was there who supports big Australia. And then Claire O'Neill comes out going, I can't believe how much consensus there was. Everyone wants high immigration. Gee, we better deliver it. It's like, yeah, because you didn't invite me. You didn't invite all these other people who are against it. You just stacked the cards with big Australia, pro-big Australia shills to get a fake consensus to run a big migration program. And then as soon as the Jobs and Skills Summit were over, the recommendations that came out of it was increase the permanent migrant intake to record levels, increase the humanitarian intake to 20,000 from 13,000. We'll go and employ 500 extra staff in the Department of Home Affairs to rubber stamp visas furiously as fast as we can to clear this fake contrived 1 million visa backlog that didn't exist. And a whole bunch of other things. They ended up extending the amount of hours that students can work. So even now it's at 24 hours a week, when pre-pandemic it was at 20 hours. That's boosted demand for student visas. They've done a whole bunch of things. They signed two migration deals with India to basically make it easier for Indians to come and work and live in Australia. All these things they've done to deliberately raise immigration to record levels. It's been deliberate. And as a result, we've got a rental crisis. And as a result, the Albanese government is now struggling in the polls and potentially faces becoming a one-term government because they've just cooked the goose on this, at the same time as they've failed to address Australia's energy crisis. So